DreAllDay.com.
You are now tuned into the show where you learn the discipline to show up day after day to do the work, the confidence to put yourself out there boldly and authentically, and the mental toughness to continue showing up, doing the work, putting yourself out there, even when the success you've expected to achieve has yet to be achieved. And on top of all this, you get a huge dose of personal initiative, which is the go-getter energy that moves any one of us, including yourself, to go and make things happen instead of waiting for things to happen. And then we put all this together into a series of frameworks, approaches, insights, strategies, and techniques all underneath the umbrella of one unifying philosophy that is called Work on Your Game. My name is Dre Baldwin, also known as DreAllDay, and welcome to the show. And today's topic, we're going to talk about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. This is something that all of you probably know exists, regardless of where you live in the world. I think everybody's pretty familiar with the fact that it's happening. You may not have gone too deep into why it's happening or what has led to it happening, or maybe even formulating any opinions on it. That's fine. I'm going to talk about it all here today. So even though I'm going to talk about this, even though I am no expert on geopolitics, as opposed to my work as being a lawyer, and as opposed to my work as being a lawyer on the internet, I do not play a geopolitical expert on on TikTok. But one thing that I am going to do, and make an adjustment right here. One thing that I am going to do here today is show you how I know, actually you probably already have seen me do this, but I'm going to do it even more here today, is to help you understand how I understand things on a logical level, even though I'm talking about something that is not specifically in my area of expertise. But again, I can do this because logically I can look at things and understand them and formulate an argument and position based on my logical understanding of things. Now, this does not mean that you are going to agree with me, because this is not a black and white situation. There's a ton of gray involved in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which is why I'm talking about it. Because if it was simply black and white, then you could go somewhere like ChatGPT or Google and it would tell you exactly what the situation is. But because there's some gray in it, that's the reason why we need people to offer nuance into these conversations. So as an American, I'm going to speak on my perspective, what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, where I see that situation based on the way I see so many people attempting to frame it, and a lot of them simply have it wrong. Because if I thought most of them had it right, I wouldn't be talking about it. I would just leave the conversation where it is in the hands of other people. But because they are screwing up and get this wrong, I got to step in and, as usual, set these people straight and show you what's actually happening in this situation. So let's start here with point number one. Today's topic, once again, is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Vladimir Putin, he is the president. I believe his title is president over there in Russia. He has often been labeled as a dictator. People use that term, labeling him as a dictator. And I see many people, such as Piers Morgan, actually, he does a good job of getting people on his show to debate with each other. That seems to be his lane, and he does pretty well on it. So Piers, I guess we can credit him for that. He and many other nameless people on the internet are always noting Putin as a dictator, as if being a dictator is some type of bad mark against him on his personal or professional resume. So first of all, let me answer the open question. Do I agree that Putin is a dictator? I would say yes. Yes, Vladimir Putin is a dictator. Russia is a dictatorship. So if you have a dictatorship, somebody's got to be the dictator. And it happens to be Vladimir Putin right now, because he's at the top of the food chain in Russia. So here's the further question. This is the one that most people never ask. Most people can ask the first question. Do you think Putin's a dictator? Most people actually don't ask it. They just assert it and assume that other people agree with them. But I went and asked the question and answered it. The further question that people don't ask is this: is being a dictator necessarily a negative thing? My answer is no. Just because Vladimir Putin is a dictator does not mean that he is wrong, bad, nor does it mean that any decision he makes is necessarily a negative decision. Understand, everybody, especially you arrogant Americans, not every country in the world operates the same way as the United States. Every country in the world is not a democracy. Not all countries are a democracy, better way of saying it. And other countries who do not operate with democracies the way that we do, they like it the way that they have it. All right, they want it to be their way. So being a dictator does not make you a bad person, the same way that being a member of a democracy does not make you moral, just, or correct. And a lot of people are arguing against Russia and against Putin with this bullshit frame of, well, he's a dictator, as if that's the only thing you need to know about him in order to make a decision about the situation. That's 100% incorrect. It's not even about me disagreeing. It's just incorrect. Because if a country is a democracy, then you elect and you have a democratic process for choosing your leaders. If a country is a dictatorship, then I don't even know how Russia chooses their dictator. Maybe the dictator chooses himself, but whatever it is, that's the way that it goes. That's the way that their system operates, and it doesn't make them bad, nor does it make him bad for being a dictator. And there are many times in life when, even in our country, in which our government is run by a democratic process, there are still times when, in our lives, individuals and in businesses and in organizations, somebody needs to step up and dictate. Somebody has to step up and lead and say, this is what's happening, this is what's not happening, this is how it's working, this is how it's not working. There are times in life when dictatorship is necessary, maybe at the political level and sometimes at the personal level. So just being a dictator on its face does not make Putin bad, nor does it make Russia bad. Moving on to point number 2. We're talking here today about the Ukraine-Russia conflict. There are myriad reasons that you can draw and talk about with regards to why Russia has invaded Ukraine. It depends on how far back you want to go in history as to where does this conflict actually begin. If you ask people from Ukraine, they're going to give you one frame. You ask people from Russia, they're going to give you a completely different frame. And if you ask 100 different people, 50 on either side of this conversation, you're going to get 100 different explanations as to where this conflict comes from. So why did Russia invade Ukraine? And we can agree, one thing we can agree with is Russia did indeed invade Ukraine. I think even Vladimir Putin would tell you himself, yeah, we invaded Ukraine. Now, the question is not whether or not they did it. The question is why they did it. And is it justified? So borrowing from what I said in my first point, just because when I told you that just because Putin's a dictator doesn't make him wrong. So I'm going to use that same frame for this one. Just because Russia invaded Ukraine does not necessarily mean that Russia did something wrong, because it matters why they invaded Ukraine. So if a country like, let's say Germany was to bomb the United States one day, and they bombed, Cleveland, Ohio, it would probably be a coastal city. So let's say I live on a coastal city, so I won't pick mine, but let's just say some coastal city, okay? And the United States decided to invade Germany and start attacking German cities. Does that make us wrong? No, because they did something to us and then we're going to do something back to them. So just because you invade a country does not necessarily mean that you're wrong. It depends on the context around the invasion and if you can sell that context to other people. And then those are the people who are going to decide whether they believe you are wrong or if they believe that you are right. Because if we're playing this whole game of, well, if you invaded or you were the aggressor, as people like to say, then we would have to point a finger at the United States of America when it comes to a country like Iraq, when it comes to Vietnam, when it comes to many countries in which we, the United States, have stuck our noses into business that was technically not ours, enter countries that are not the United States and got involved in business that, again, we didn't even have to be involved in if we didn't decide to get involved. But I digress. To say that Russia invaded Ukraine as an unprovoked move, that is false. Now, if you say Putin's a dictator, okay, true. You say Russia invaded Ukraine, also true. But that it was unprovoked is not true. That's false. This is not an unprovoked move. Russia didn't just, or let's say Vladimir Putin, he did not just wake up one week on a Tuesday and say, hey, you know what we're going to do today? We're going to invade Ukraine. It did not happen that way. There was a provoking that led to this. Now, the question here, the crux of this whole conversation becomes, why was Russia provoked? Should they have felt provoked to do what they did? Was what preceded their invasion something that was okay by whoever did it to do, or was it not okay? And the disagreement in this area right here with those three questions, that's where you actually get the conflict in the conversation about Russia and Ukraine, which is, was this okay? Was it not okay? What did you do? What did they do? What was the thought process behind it? And how should somebody or other have responded or reacted to what occurred? That's where the actual conflict is, right here in the middle here, not on these surface level points that I already have addressed so far in this episode. So depending on how much you know about geopolitics and histories of these countries, there are many reasons why Russia and Vladimir Putin could come up with as a pretext or solid reasons to enter Ukraine. They have some solid reasons if you want to look at it from their side. Now, again, whether or not you agree with those reasons is irrelevant. That's not the point. The question is, does or did Vladimir Putin have reasons to invade Ukraine? The answer is he does have reasons. Again, you don't have to agree with his reasons, but you can't say that he didn't have a reason, or reasons, plural. One reason that Putin invaded Ukraine is because Putin has consistently warned in his conversations with the members of NATO, North Atlantic Trade Organization, and its member nations not to expand their alliance. So it's basically a bunch of countries who are together that are basically working together and affiliated with each other. And if you have a problem, we'll help you out. If we have a problem, you'll help us out. Let's just put it that way, painting with a very broad brush here. And Putin has let NATO know, do not add nations to your alliance that border our country. Now, Russia is a very big country. Russia borders a whole lot of other countries. Let me pull up Russia on the map here so we can look at all the countries that Russia borders, because there's so many of them. I probably won't even be able to name them all. But looking in that area, yeah, Russia does border several countries. I'm not even going to name all the countries that Russia borders, but of course you have to its east side, you have Ukraine, you have Ukraine, you have Belarus, you have Latvia and Estonia. You also have Finland. These countries all to the east, and in a way, Norway as well. No, that's not Norway. What country is this? No, that's Russia. Okay, so just Finland. So these Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Belarus, and Ukraine, these countries all border Russia to the east. And Russia has continually let NATO know, do not add nations to your organization that are on our border, because Russia is looking at that as a threat. Now, again, you have to understand the mindset of who you're dealing with to determine if someone calling something a threat means they're going to do something, or are they just talking. And this is where, when the communication breaks down and or the recipient of that message does a bad job of reading the room, which I believe NATO did a bad job of reading the room by trying to add Ukraine to its organization. Russia responded with, okay, we told you not to do this. You did it anyway. So now we're going to respond. And this is how we are going to respond. And if NATO moved closer to the Russian border, the Russians were going to respond. They responded. And Vladimir Putin decided that with his threat being ignored, basically, this is one of the reasons he had for invading Ukraine. Now, whether you agree with this or not is immaterial to the fact that he believes it to be a good enough reason, because he's the one who makes the decision whether to invade or not. Since you and I don't have any say in the decision of whether to invade or not, whether we agree with his choice to follow up on his threat with this action doesn't really matter. So it's a false frame to say, I'm saying all that to say this, is a false frame to say that Russia invaded Ukraine for no reason at all, or that this invasion was completely unprovoked, or that Putin is doing things just to do them. None of those things are true, because no one gets to that level of power by doing things recklessly or without a lot of premeditation. And the reason that I just gave you, there can be many others, again, depending on how deep you want to go into the history between these countries and into geopolitics, which I'm not going to do here today. But that reason alone is a solid enough reason. Do not expand your alliance to touch any countries that touch ours. And if you do, there's going to be a response. And I think the NATO nations did believe that there would be a response if they kept doing what they were doing, but maybe they didn't think the response would be what it ended up being. And now we're in the situation that we're in. And I'm saying all of that just to establish this as a frame, because these points so far as a frame, because there seems to be a lot of Westerners who are talking about the Russia-Ukraine conflict as if, and I see a lot of politicians, especially those on the left, talking about this as if there is only one way that you're allowed to look at this, and it must be what they are framing, which is, number one, Putin's a dictator. They use that as a pejorative, which means he must be a bad guy because he's a dictator. And number two, Russia invaded Ukraine, which they did. But again, it depends on why they invaded, because I may be in a conflict with another person and I might walk up to them and punch them in the face, which technically makes me the aggressor. But the question is not if I did it, because it's obvious that I did. The question is, why did I do it? If I have a good enough reason for why I did it, then you might see the situation differently than just saying, well, he was the aggressor, so that means he must be wrong. Not necessarily. There are times in life when you need to be the aggressor in a situation, in a conflict. And if you're not the aggressor, you're going to end up being a victim. So it doesn't necessarily make them bad that Russia was the aggressor. And number three, they say it was unprovoked. This one is just completely false. The other two are false frames. This one is just a complete inaccuracy. It was not unprovoked. They have a reason to have done what they did. Again, you may not agree with their reason. Doesn't mean they didn't have a reason. Point number three. Today's topic, once again, is we're talking the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Number three, most importantly, for those here in the United States, the only reason that this war, quote unquote. And this is kind of a war. I mean, it may not feel like a war to us because it's not really touching us here in America. The only reason that this war is continuing, and it is a war, is because, and people are dying over there, is because the United States is providing resources to Ukraine to, open quote, defend itself. That's the frame that we've been given, again, mostly by people on the political left. That's what I've heard, that Ukraine has a right to defend itself and Ukraine should defend itself against an aggressive enemy with a dictatorial leader in Vladimir Putin who attacked Ukraine in an unprovoked way. This is the way that you hear people talking about it. Again, so they're giving you all the fallacies all in one sentence. And they're saying that Ukraine has a right to defend itself. And I'm putting that in quotes, defend itself. First of all, Ukraine is not fucking defending itself. We're paying for it. So that's another that's just a falsehood. Ukraine is not defending itself. Ukraine is being defended by our resources. And when I say our resources, what I mean is the taxpayer dollars of American citizens. That's where they're getting the money from. That's our money that is defending Ukraine. So Ukraine can't defend itself. Let me back up. Ukraine is being defended by us, American taxpayers, and with our help, our money is going to, and military equipment is going to them, without which Ukraine, if they were in a fair fight, quote unquote fair, when I say fair fight, what I mean is just you and the other one-on-one fight with no help from either side, to either side, a fair fight against Russia, Ukraine would have been flattened and turned into essentially a parking lot within about 48 hours. If it was just Russia against Ukraine and nobody else got involved, it'd be over. And Ukraine knows this, and Russia knows this, and everybody else in the world knows this. And a lot of people who want to frame Russia as these bad guys don't want to admit to this point because it's too real for them to accept. Ukraine does not have the resources or the manpower to defend itself, quote unquote, against a country like Russia. It could not do it. It's not possible. It wouldn't even be a fight. It wouldn't even be a battle. The United States has had an issue with Russia for decades. If you go back to the Cold War years, decades ago. So the United States, depending on who you talk to, sees Russia as an enemy. And now, even though Russia is not directly doing anything to the United States right now, that I don't know what the United States could actually look at Russia as an enemy about right now, today. Let's just say the last 15 or 20 years. What has Russia done to the United States that has us as enemies? Now, maybe we were enemies in the past. Maybe we don't see each other as friends, but do we have an active issue? Is there beef between the United States and Russia right now? I don't think so. The only conflict that there is the United States is getting behind Ukraine and their fight against Russia right now. But at the same time, we have a new president who seems to be not hold so much negative energy towards Russia as the previous administration did. We'll get into that in a moment. And the United States had an issue with Russia for some time. As I said, a underlying kind of simmering on a back burner issue with Russia for years. And it appears to me that the political left in America that was the previous regime, that was the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris regime, they were using Ukraine as a pawn / proxy in this process to fight Russia. And that I think Biden and Harris really wanted to do something to neutralize or weaken Russia. And they decided to jump into this Ukraine conflict, or maybe even pushed Ukraine to do the things that they knew Russia was going to respond to, so that the United States had a reason they can sell to the public as to why we have to go fight Russia, because look how bad Russia is. So maybe they did it to provoke Russia. They started playing footsies with Ukraine to provoke Russia to do something. And now that Russia has done something, now the United States can use our resources to fight against Russia, was what we wanted to do all along. But the United States was not quite ballsy enough to just go and attack Russia on just straight up and just have a straight up fair fight. Maybe. Again, this is just a theory that I'm throwing out there. So what we really wanted to do is not protect Ukraine, because Ukraine is just a pawn in this whole situation. And we really wanted to fight Russia. And again, what we wanted to do as a country, depending on who was in charge, this was a golden opportunity to do so, because now they attack Ukraine. Well, look, we got to jump in. We can't let them attack Ukraine. I don't think the current administration under President Donald Trump wants to continue this. And Donald Trump has fancied himself and positioned himself as a deal maker and negotiator. That's his favorite thing to do, is make deals and negotiate. So I am predicting, and by the time you hear this, this will be maybe several weeks after I've recorded it, that he is going to bring an end to the hot part of the conflict. Let's just put it that way. And the point overall is the Biden administration used this false frame that Ukraine has every right to defend itself. Again, because that's a nonsense frame, because Ukraine they do have a right to defend themselves, but they never did because they couldn't. They didn't have the tools. They couldn't fight. All that money is coming from us, and that money is coming from your pockets, as I already explained. Citizens of America, listen to this. Our tax dollars are funding Ukraine in this United States proxy war against Russia. We're really fighting Russia and just using Ukraine as an excuse. And the United States should not be playing security guard to other countries who are incapable of defending themselves and using our money to do it. That doesn't make sense. And I don't think a lot of citizens are in on that, but I could be wrong. There are a lot of citizens who are in on this, and there are many who are not. I think the latest election that happened in November of 2024 was a loud and clear response from the citizenry of America that we want to focus on America. We want to focus on America first. That was Donald Trump's whole thing from the very beginning. So while it is true that we are in agreement and alliances with a lot of other countries outside of the USA, these countries, again, we do a lot more for them than they can do for us. And Donald Trump has expressed this explicitly multiple times during both of his presidential administrations. Why are we in relationships where we are giving 90% of the resources and only receiving 10% in exchange? What are we getting out of this? We're not getting anything out of this except we get to feel like we're somebody and feel like we're powerful because we can help all these other countries out. And if they ever get in trouble, they can call us to help them. But if we get in trouble, can we call them? No, because they can't help us. They can't do anything for us. So why are we bending over backwards to help these countries? And why are we giving our resources to them to help them? Again, what do we gain from doing this? These are legitimate questions. Ukraine is a mere pawn in this process. They have no power, no resources, nowhere near the military strength of a Russia or a United States. And they are at the mercy of both countries in this process, regardless of how tough or defiantly their leader, Mr. Zelensky, tries to frame himself as being. All right, in between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, Mr. Zelensky is a nobody. All due respect. He has no power in this situation. If the United States and Russia got into a battle, Ukraine would be collateral damage. Whatever happens to them would be collateral damage. They can't help the United States. They can't help Russia, and they can't hurt either one of us. They don't have the weaponry to do so. They don't have the resources to do so. So for Mr. Zelensky to come over here to the USA and be defiant in front of the cameras about, as if he is dictating the situation. He was immediately, if you saw that little video clip, he immediately got called out and put in his place by first Vice President Vance and then by President Trump. Like, dudes, you don't even have the cards. Why are you talking as if you are dictating things or you're running the situation here? The only reason that, and Trump didn't say this so much in front of the cameras, or he might have said it off camera, and hopefully he did. He seems like the type of person who would. Like, dude, the only reason your country is still standing and your head has not been chopped off is because we've been providing you resources. Who the hell are you to come here and act like you're dictating something when we're the only reason you're still alive? Be quiet and be happy that we're helping you. Again, Trump seems like the type of person who would say something like that. And maybe he did to Mr. Zelensky. Now, moving on to point number 4. Today's topic, once again, is the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I'm saying, with everything that I've said here, I want all of you to understand. From what I've heard, I've never been to Ukraine, but I know some people. Actually, I know several people who are from Ukraine. I know some people who have family who are still in Ukraine to this day. And I know some athletes who have played in Ukraine. From everything I've seen and heard, Ukraine is a beautiful place. That area of Europe, depending on your taste for the men out there, depending on your taste in women, that area of Europe produces some of the most beautiful women you have ever seen. Again, these areas, let me tell you, Russia itself, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Latvia, Lithuania, where I have been, Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, these areas produce some very beautiful women. And I'm saying all that to say, I do not want Ukraine to go away. I don't want Ukraine to be turned into a parking lot. I would hope that doesn't happen. Okay. I hope that Ukraine continues to stand and that Ukraine continues to produce, and that whole area continues to produce more of the beautiful things it has produced up to this point in all of our lives. Okay. And I hope the war is ended in a peaceful way. I think the best chance of it happening is with a person who loves negotiating and making deals. That would be President Donald Trump in the middle of the situation, which he is right now as we are speaking. And hopefully, maybe by the time you hear this episode, he's concluded the situation, at least the hot part of the war. And overall, people in the United States need to question your beliefs and your understandings of why this conflict is happening, who is to blame for it happening, and why you, as an American who maybe has never even been out of the country, why do you have a fucking Ukraine flag in your social media profile if you don't really know the details of the situation other than what you were told by some politician, knowing that politicians are never ever telling you the full truth of a situation? How could you be so naive as to be psyoped into believing, well, we have to defend this side because of what you heard on the news or what somebody told you or the emotions of the people around you? All right, we got to be smarter than this in 2025 and beyond, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not saying that you have to have the same view that I have. I'm saying that you need to think critically about the situation before you pick a side in a conflict in which you may not know that much and you've been psyoped into believing certain things that are simply not true. That's what I'm saying. All right, if you couldn't even point out Ukraine on a map that didn't have the names on it, why the hell do you have a Ukraine flag in your bio? You can say the same thing about the Israel-Palestine situation. If you couldn't point out that country on a map, if it didn't have the names on it, why do you have their flag in your bio? What do you know about the situation? And why do you have the position that you have? Do you understand the other side's position, and could you make it for them if you needed to? If you couldn't, then why are you stating an opinion? So stop this virtue signaling bullshit that many of you have bought into. Some of you have been raised on this nonsense. I am here to help save you from it, save you from yourself and save you from the psyop. All that said, let's recap today's class, which is we're talking about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Even though I'm no geopolitical expert and I'm not even a lawyer, I just play one on TikTok. I have some positions on this that I want you to understand that really should help you understand what you believe better. Number one, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, has been labeled a dictator. Being a dictator is not necessarily a bad thing. There are times in my life when I am very much a dictator. It doesn't make me bad. It means I'm the one in charge and what I say goes. There's nothing wrong with that. Number two, there are myriad reasons why that you can draw and talk about with regards to Russia invading Ukraine, but you cannot say it was an unprovoked attack. That's nonsense. These two countries have decades of history with each other that go way back before, maybe further back than many of you even know they go back. So to say that this attack was unprovoked is ridiculous. And this is the way that the political left has continually framed this to sell the idea that the United States needs to go and support Ukraine. And that's a false frame, which means everything that comes after it has to be by definition false. Number three, a lot of the political left have said that Ukraine has every right to, open quote, defend itself, close quote. They can't defend themselves. They can't. We are defending them, because if Ukraine had every right to defend itself, then people in the United States wouldn't even care about this, and I wouldn't even be talking about it, because there'd be a war between Ukraine and Russia, and that ain't my business, and I don't give a damn. That's how I think about it. The reason that I know about it is because people in America keep talking about it, because the United States is involved, because we're sending our money to them to defend them. So if they had every right to defend themselves, which they do, then why are they not doing it? And why are we getting involved? If they're capable of fighting for themselves, we shouldn't be fighting for them. But since they can't, we're jumping in it with our money. And that means people like me and you are allowed to have an opinion on it because we're paying for it. And number four, from what I've seen and heard, Ukraine is a beautiful place. From what I have personally experienced, this area of the world produces some of the most beautiful women that you have seen, again, depending on your tastes. So I don't want Ukraine to get turned into a parking lot, which it would if the United States was not involved in helping to defend a country that cannot defend itself. And I believe the best option for this situation ending is a great negotiator, Donald Trump, in between Vladimir Putin and Mr. Zelensky. I think he's the best negotiator of the three of them. And I also know the United States has the most war, power, and resources between the three of them as well. So the United States will be listened to because of who the United States is. So all of you running around with Ukraine flags and calling Putin a dictator as some form of pejorative, this is nonsense. Think critically, question your beliefs and where you got those beliefs. You do not need to have the same conclusion as I do. But if you don't really know what's going on in this situation, don't be so quick to pick a side. All right, that's where we start going wrong as a society, where we start going left as a society. And pun is intended. All that being said, folks, workonyourgameuniversity.com. You want to work with me directly, get into our programs. We had a couple different options. You can learn more about that at the link down below in the description, and work on your game. Dre, all